somewhere, right? It is what it is, right? So there we go. All right, let's get to Angular. Angular is the fun one. And you're like, why is Angular the fun one? Also, I have to get rid of this. Bye. Watch, it's going to take all day. All right, now we remember where. So when I'm hooked up to this guy, it makes my monitor go crazy, if you hadn't noticed. So I have to look around for the. And then, boom, my second last one. Introduction to Angular. So today we're going to actually download it, right? So now we're going to discuss client-side web development using client-side frameworks like Angular. So we're going to just use Angular. We described the development environment for Angular. The development environment uses Node.js. You can't get around using Node.js for the development environment, unless you wish to do a shit ton of work. I do not wish to do a shit ton of work. So we're going to use Node.js. Node.js is a development environment in which you make a change, it sees the change every time you save the file, and it will try to recompile it. So it's kind of useful in that regard. Just don't make a ton of changes at once, because it's not like NetBeans where you can actually scroll up and down. It's a command window. And so it's a little bit harder to read if you let a large number of errors happen at once. We're going to talk about Angular components, concepts including modules, components, views, data, binding, and services, and how it all fits together. And then we're going to do our first one. We're going to discuss single page application, SPA concepts, including directory and application structure. We're going to talk about how it actually works. Then when we get done, we're going to get fancy a couple times, right? But not until we have routing, until we have services, until we have all those things. We're going to get fancy, because once we put this with our server, we have to make Angular the default router, right? So in terms of just selecting which endpoint you go to, Angular should be the only endpoint that responds, right? So we'll talk about that in a little bit. We're also going to talk about why the development environment is development environment. We're going to talk about trying to think of the word, transpiling Angular code into JavaScript. Essentially, what transpiling means is not compiling. We're going to translate the Angular stuff into a JS document that goes into an index.html page that you can submit via Spring. I'm trying to think of the name of it, via Spring, and then it just runs without the Node.js environment, right? So we'll talk about that as well. That's a deployment mechanism. That's the word I was looking for. I had brain farts today. Did you guys see how foggy it was?
It was cool.
Definitely Scooby-Doo weather, right? The mystery van. I was worried the mystery van was going to roll up.
Did you change into that when you got here? Or you just
No, dude, I got upstairs at 9:20. That reminds me, dude. Take a picture of me. Can you change the thing? You're gonna have to change the thing.
Oh yeah, flip it. You don't want pictures of me?
I think you know the answer to that question. So anyway, all right, go ahead. Take the picture.
Yeah, I took like 8 of them. Right?
Okay, good. I need it back. I'm sorry. In case you go looking through my email.
Nah.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't think you would, but anyway, it's also really warm, by the way. This hoodie is really warm. Oh yeah, you know what? They can't see. Give me just 1 second. I'll throw on some video here. So if anybody that doubted me, haters gotta hate, but I am wearing the thing. All right, I'm gonna stop the video so we can get back to work. Angular is actually relatively easy to do. The thing about Angular is it's all going to be generated code. We're going to generate a shit ton of code. We're not going to be coding as much. We're going to generate code, and they're going to put little bitty things inside those methods that make it all work. But it's not a lot of code, okay? That sometimes, how do I describe this? I know I said this earlier, but like when we use like Spring, you can remember see how Spring does all these things for you. But that means you only have to write like 10 lines of code to get this endpoint that does this thing, right? I mean, connects to the database, does all that stuff for you, right? but that requires a bit of knowledge to use, right? I mean, that's kind of the problem. Angular is very similar to that. We're going to generate code. The coding that we actually have to do is going to be relatively small, but it requires a little bit more knowledge. So make sure that we are cool. I would ask you to show a video, but maybe if we have time later, okay? So that way we can see what she looks like in the She-Hulk costume. Is that not appropriate? It's appropriate. Do people want to show off their costume? They should be allowed to. No? Anyway, client-side code is written in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Runs inside the web browser, has little or no access to the underlying OS. Since browsers are responsible for actually doing everything, we can't control the user sees, right? We talked about this. Browsers provide inconsistent level compatibilities. Part of the challenge is hitting those differences gracefully. That is literally what these client-side frameworks are built to do. We develop our pages, and then JavaScript makes it look how it's supposed to look, right? We don't do a lot of those things, and that's what these frameworks are really partially designed to do. JavaScript is an essential part of the web. We talked about how much easier it does to make everything. Framework is a library. We talked about this as well. These opinions allow for predictability and homogeneity and so forth, and scale. We can scale. I'm going to move along because we already talked about this. Angular is an application design framework and development platform for creating efficient and sophisticated single-page apps. Can you do other things other than single-page apps? Yes. Do we want to do other things other than single-page apps? For our system, no. We're not ever going to get complicated enough where you're going to need what you call it. But imagine, though, we're trying to build something that is a little bit more complicated. We just have to build a hierarchical structure from it. It's still a single-page app, but it's a single-page app that sort of links to other single-page apps. It's not like it's not like we have to do this strange new thing, right? It's not that different. We're just going to skip over that part because our website's going to be relatively smaller. Single-page applications are a fairly common choice for these type of frameworks. Once loaded, it loads, then it loads everything else. Why is this important? Because it can front load, right? Like, so you can load a page and then it can actually load other components and other things rather quickly in ways that, for instance, it can download things like images and those type of things, even when they're not supposed to be displayed, so that when it's time to display them, they pop up, right? Not pop up screens, but you get the idea. Angular advantage. So custom components, you can declaratively build. So declaratively build means you can say, this is what I want this to do. And then the system behind is going to actually go find the data that's going to match to the component, right? So a component actually connects both of those together. So you have rendering logic to make it look a certain way, and then you have the component that provides the functionality, right? And they work together. Data binding, so we can move data from core JS code to the view and react to the view without dealing with glue code. So we're going to deal with JSON and JSON arrays. I'm having one of those days where I can't remember words. JSON and JSON arrays, it can deal with those directly, but it's also going to allow us to do data binding. So imagine we have a website form, and then you have a employee data being represented by that form, right? Underlying, there's a JSON object, right? And it's displaying it in the form. Let's suppose that somebody goes and changes the name to drawing a blank, Joe Smith, right? Change the name to Joe Smith. We don't have to write anything to make that change back down to the object. You're like, wait, what? It's not automatically, right? It's pretty huge. Dependency injection, we can write modular services and have them inject when necessary. So if we want to do something with like a service and then connect to this application or connect to that application, we just use dependency injection. So when we need this type of object, we just grab the type of object and include it in our code. If we don't need it, we don't inject it, right? This is the notion of when we need a dependency, we just grab it. It's comprehensive. It's full-fledged framework. It can do everything that you might want to do. It does even more than you can imagine, like more than we do. But it deals with server communication, routing, and so much more. Routing is the idea that you want to go to one page, you give it one URL, you go to another page, you want to go to another URL. Remember, single page application does not mean you're going to look at the same thing all the entire time. You can actually swap components in and out and build an entire website from a single page application. I know this because that's what y'all are going to do. Most of Angular 2+0 uses Node.js for large parts of its build environment. So even though we won't use Node.js, we do have to install it. We want the development environment. You want the development environment. Can you transpile it without it? Yeah, maybe. I'm never going to describe how. I don't think it's a good idea because it would take you much longer to do. Right, so we're going to install Node.js. Pretty easy. You need RPM. So here's the thing. Use this website, HTTP Angular IO guide, and don't worry about the Node.js download. And I'll tell you why. So you go to the website. Damn it, it did the dash. As a .20 because it saw it as a space. Right? Do not use stack blitz, right? Because that code is very difficult to get off. It's useful in stack blitz to do some quick testing, but it's not useful outside of that environment. All right. So it says it requires an active TLS. You just click on it. And it gets the release schedule so you can see which one versions you need, blah, 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 blah. Is the right? No. Sorry, I need this again. Sorry, give me a second. Can't read. You have to install it though. And yeah, I'm just gonna click here. Do not download it this way. This is not a good way to, oh yeah. You know what, I'll just share this link that I have. This is why this link is here. This is the updated link for the download folder. I'm sorry. I'll make sure to include this. I thought it was on that page. It was when you did. So Node.js, if you want to download it, I selected Windows installer because that's the one I want. If you have a Mac, right? Whatever. You want the 64-bit, 32-bit, you can choose these down here. This is automatically what it thinks you want. So it's the current LTS, blah, 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 and you want the LTS. LTS is long-term support. Current has those bleeding edge features, which may or may not be broken. So anyway, download it, and when you install it, it says, do I want to use PowerShell and all those? It just install everything. Like, there's really installs Python at some point. It really doesn't matter, right? Once this class is over, feel free to just get rid of it, right? I will. And then, for those of you who have not used this before, you should have npm installed, right? How can we test? You can actually use a version to, I don't remember the command. It's npm-v or something. I did say version by accident, which is funny, I guess, but not that funny. But anyway, you can use version to get it to come up. Just the version would be a little quicker than, I don't know what you wanted to do, right? But you should get this command before you move forward. If you can't move, you don't get this, Node.js problem, right? You don't want Node.js problems, right? So that's the first thing you need to do. Then you install the Angular CLI. This is basically this process from setup local. I already closed the page, didn't I? From the setup local. Just gonna do it again once. This thinks the stash is a actual. Yeah, see, look, it doesn't copy the dash for some reason. This is actually this process here. This is not different. It's that same process. Like literally same process. It says other things, but I don't care about that. Okay, and I don't need to do it because I already did it, right? It's gonna take forever if I actually run it, but this one might take a minute, so I wouldn't be in a hurry. Node.js actually goes pretty quickly, right? But this one takes a minute. All right, and then it says you can use Angular CLI. This is where we're not going to use npm, the package manager, to do our work. We're actually going to use Angular CLI, which is command line tools, essentially. Command line interface is what that stands for. That's the tool we're going to actually use to build our components, to build our services, and it's going to generate the skeleton code. It's going to generate half of our code. To install it, we just run the command. It's the same as it is on the page. Now we can test it by creating a new workspace and initial starter app. So I like to create, and get this, y'all going to love this. I'm going to run the code, and then it's going to take a minute to actually do it. You're like, wait, what? Yeah. So I'm going to go ng new, because I want to create a new application. And I'm going to go hello. And I'm going to call it hello world app, just so that it doesn't go through the other one. And then it's going to do all the things it needs to do to create an Angular app in the folder in apparently mruth. That is not a great idea. It says, would you like Angular routing? You almost always want to select yes. Which style do you want to use? You all know CSS. You don't know the others, so stick with CSS. And you're done. It's going to actually create a bunch of files in a folder. Unfortunately, that folder is going to be inside the mruth instead of my desktop folder. Oops. But then it says installing packages npm. There are a lot of packages that are necessary in order for this to run, so you just let it run. So, and we'll talk about how to run it in a minute. Obviously, it's not ready to run. The engineer command prompts you from information about features, except the defaults. You're almost always going to want to select routing, by the way. Routing is going to be the one that allows you to choose which page gets loaded based on which URL. So you want that. Angular CLI installs necessary packages and other dependencies. It can take a few minutes. Creates a new workspace in a simple welcome app ready to run. Now, I haven't gotten this actually installed yet. As you can see, it's still running. But I want to point out something very simple. When you look at this, when we actually look at how big this folder is, some of you are going to go, wait, wow, that's a big folder. It is. It's multiple gigabytes, not multiple gigabytes, like gigabytes. It's a very large folder compared to what you think it is. You're not going to want to submit that, right? So I'm going to show you what you can move in order to submit your homeworks once it eventually loads. Now, once you have the application run, you're going to actually run it by going into the folder, CD, whatever folder it is. In my case, it's hello world. And you type ng serve and --open. --open is not necessary, but --open would actually open a browser window up to the right page. The right page is going to be localhost at port 4200. That's going to be, once it starts running, that's when it's going to, yeah, it takes a minute. That's the page the server is going to be run on. All right, so let's get started. So Angular is a platform and framework for building single page applications using HTML and something called TypeScript. Angular is actually written in TypeScript. It implements core and optional functionalities as a set of TypeScript libraries that you import into your apps. TypeScript is basically JavaScript, right? It's got some sub features, got some slight changes and so forth. It allows us to do some things in the HTML that we wouldn't do normally, but it gets translated to JavaScript at the end of the day. 90% of your code is TypeScript is the same. 99% of it is actually just JavaScript, right? So it's not that big a deal. The basic building block is component, and components are organized into modules. ng modules collect related code into functional sets. They're like packages. An Angular app is defined by a set of ng modules. An app always at least has a root module that enables bootstrapping and typically has more feature. What does a bootstrap module mean? That's the part that actually runs the core Angular, sets up the routing, sets up this, sets up that, sets up how it's going to work. Components define views, which are then sets of screen elements that Angular can choose among and modify according to your program logic and data. 99% of what we're going to do is we're going to have a single root module and many components as a part of that root module. We are going to need to import modules depending on what we need to do, such as form modules, right? As an example. It's just like importing. When you think about importing from a Java perspective, it's the same process. Form modules are one that's a key element. Trying to think of other ones. You have routing modules, and you'll also have, oh, there's one other one you'll use frequently, and I'm drawing a blank. HTTP client module, I think it's something like that. It's an HTTP module or HTTP client module. I can't remember which one it is, but we'll use several modules repeatedly. But when you think of feature modules, think of things you're going to import, not things you have to develop. Okay. But anyway, components define views. Earlier, we talked about the modularity element of components, that components provide functionality and the view, right? That is what's happening, but you separate it completely, right? You have a template-like thing, and then you have functional code that's going to run here, that's going to build the things you need to display it, essentially, which just sets a screen element that Angular choose among and modify according to your project logic and data. Components also use services, right? We don't want to put all the logic inside a component. We want to actually put in a service so that if we're going to use it, the same code in multiple places, it should be in a service, not in a component, because if it's in a component, it can't be used by other components. Which provides specific functionality not related to views. Service providers can be injected into components as dependencies, making your code modular, reusable, and efficient. So what do I mean by that? When you need a component, or not a component, when you need a service, you just say, I need a, not import a service, but you create the service variable, and then when you create the service variable, you have to import the service, and that's it. Then you get to use it. That's the injection part, right? Similar to what we did with Spring, except we didn't need to do as much injection. But that's the basic idea. When we need something, we just include it, and it's included. All right, let's check on. Haha. So now we're going to go cd hello world ng serve open. Takes a minute to detecting generated browsing application model, blah 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 blah. The development environment uses Node.js, so at a minimum, it's going to actually start Node.js, the server. It's going to actually start a server that you're going to access to. That's the 4200 piece, but it's also going to compile it and put it in a usable way. So TypeScript is not actually something we actually compile, but this doesn't take that long. This is pretty quick, especially since we didn't do anything. Yay! And then you get a screen like this. It says compiled successfully, and then hello world app. Now, by default, you get a bunch of garbage. We'll play with this by the time we're done. By default, you get a bunch of garbage because it's essentially an Angular ad. Yes, y'all like Angular ads, right? Y'all like ads. All right. But that is telling us work. If I go to change it later on, and I am going to change it later on, it's going to, these are the files that are created as a result of the code that we have. And then it's built, and then it compiles it successfully. Great. But you notice all these are JavaScript files. It takes the TypeScript, doesn't compile it in the normal sense. It just takes the whatever you give it and turns it into JavaScript. It's actually called transpiling, not compiled, but many of you would think of that they're the same. It takes code and produces executable form of it. So modules, components, and services are classes that are what we call decorators. They mark their type and provide metadata that tells Angular how to use them. The metadata for a component class is associated with a template that designs a view. The component class does the work. The view is a template that will actually take whatever data item that you have and turn it into a visual element on a web page. Right, whether it's be a form, whether it's a list of employees, or I think you guys are using reviews, and we're using students in class. And I really drawing a blank today. I'm really scraping the bottom of the barrel today. I apologize, but So we're going to use students in class. So a list of students or a single student or whatever we want to do. A template combines ordinate HTML with what we call Angular directives. So it tells the template's all about figuring out how to make it look a certain way and using simple data elements that we'll see to organize that data in such a way that it'll bind to modify the HTML before it's rendered for display. Wait, what? So it's a template engine. Part of it's a template engine that takes the template and you use some directives that the component understands how to use. The component's going to create the data for it. And then just before it displays it, right, you get a request for it, just before it displays it, it generates the actual HTML, which is the point. The metadata the service provides for the information that Angular needs to make it available is through dependency injection. So how do we get the data for something, right? We're not going to screw around in our class. We're not going to create, I'm not going to create, in this class, I'm not going to create like fake objects, right? So that we can play with fake objects before we play with the database objects. We're going to start immediately off with services. Before we do anything else, we're going to do a service. Obviously, I'm going to do that tomorrow, not today, but still the idea is we're going to start off immediately with a service. Immediately, right? So we're not screwing around with that. So we'll use dependency injection to get that metadata. An app's components typically define many views arranged hierarchically, right? So what does that mean? You almost always have a main page. You go to the main page, it might do something, and then it takes them to this page or takes them to that page. But usually you have a main page and then you have other pages that come off of it. Angular provides the router service, which helps you define navigation paths among views. How do we navigate from view to view? We'll talk about that quite a bit. It is absolutely paths, right? So it looks and feels just like we're manipulating the path for go to a website and you go to students/index.html. Feels like that, but it's not. Right? We're going to talk about that quite a bit. But it provides sophisticated in-browser navigation capabilities. We can literally tell someone, you have to go to this page. An ng module declares a compilation context, so this is some in-between stuff, for a set of components that's dedicated to application domain, workflow, or closely related set. There are no components that are not going to be a part of a module. ng module can associate its components with related code, such as services, to form what we call functional units. Every Angular app has a root module conventionally named app module. You see app module in your what's called think root module. Very simple. This actually provides the bootstrap that starts it. An app typically may have many functional modules. However, the app module is what actually loads the single page application and does the things to get it to start. Like JavaScript modules, ng modules can import functionality from others and allow their functionality to be exported and used by other modules. For example, you can use the router service and router service in your app, you import the router module. We talked about that quite a bit. We're going to import a forms module. We're going to import an HTTP client module. We have a variety of ones that we're going to use pretty regularly. Organize your code into these modules helps manage the development of complex applications as well as design for reusability. Essentially, each component, when you think about it, is equivalent to like a web page. So you can actually, build a website and use the component template and then have the entire thing in one area be one module, and another area be another module, and so forth, so that it literally works that way. But you're going to find if you're using, like, say, a student website, for example, you're going to have courses or things that are common among other things, and you might find it easy to put those things in a service. So it helps you organize things for much, much more complex applications that we're going to use in class. In addition, this technique lets you take advantage of lazy loadings. That means loading modules on demand. If they never go to the forums page, they never load a forms view. Do we need the forms module? We do not, and it will not load it, right? What does that do? Cuts down on the size of the application, which is pretty good. It minimizes the code that needs to be loaded at startup, which is beneficial. The page loads more quickly. So every component has at least one component, the root component that connects the component hierarchy with the page document model. You always have a root component. Our root components will be super duper simple. Wait, what? So our root module is going to essentially define a place to put all the other modules, to put all the other components, I'm sorry. That's going to be our root component. Why? Simplifies everything. It simplifies everything, right? Each component class that defines a class that contains application data and logic is associated with the template that defines a view. So you have component classes, and then you have a view. Every single component is going to have a view and related code, right? Every one. The add component decorator identifies the class immediately below it as a component and provides the template and related component specific metadata. Good news, you never have to write that. You go, wait, what? You never have to write that. And I want you to know that, because if you're looking through your code and you're trying to make sense of it, you see the add component, that's component. Ta-da. Templates combine HTML with Angular markup. They modify HTMLs before they're displayed. So these directives provide program logic and binding markup. So what you're doing is you're essentially, imagine you have an array, right? Not just simply a data object, right? You have an array. You're going to have a way of specifying, say, an array name. You all know what arrays are. So you have an array name, and then you're going to write a for loop to loop through the array, and then do some HTML stuff with that data, right? That's what these directives are. Or just to take an employee object or a student object, and then the name goes here. The major goes here. This goes here. That goes here. Imagine you have a form like you did for your homework. Hopefully you did for your homework, right? Well, you had reviews. You have a review ID field, right, in the form. So what if you made that form element tie to the student review.id? So it would automatically display there.
So instead of like manually putting the 5,000 in, it would just do it itself.
Yes. There's no manual. Just that's an automatically binding part. You're essentially binding an object in the component to the template, and then the template's just about rendering it. But there are things like for loops and if statements. We'll do both of those in the template that we can do. And it's important to know how to use both of them. But like everything, keep it simple, right? Keep it simple. Very simple. The more simple, the better. And binding markup allows you to identify which type of binding you want. There are two types of binding. You have event binding. Your app responds to user input by updating the application data as necessary. And then you have property binding, lets you take values that are computed from your application and put those in the HTML. Wait, what? So data binding, when we think of event just means something the user's doing is causing changes in the application data. Property binding is you're just changing properties or binding things to properties. You might have a specific color scheme or something, and you have a color scheme object somewhere, and then you're binding it to that as an example. I've never really screwed with that. Before view is displayed, Angular evaluates the directives and resolves the binding syntax to modify the HTML elements and the DOM according to your program data and logic. In other words, the web page is built. Angular supports two-way data binding, meaning that changes in the DOM, such as user choices, are reflected in the program data. So remember I said earlier that you had the review ID in a review ID field. If the user goes and you said 5,000, I think. So if the user changes it from 5,000 to 5555, we don't have to do anything. The service component object that binds to that object has also then changed. So if we submit that object to an external service, like submit through the submit button, right, whatever, and we send it to our Spring framework, which we'll talk about very soon, that change will be made to the database as well. So pretty important. Templates can also use pipes, which can improve the user performance by transforming values for display. Now, then we can get fancy with pipes, and we will. Some things are pretty simple, like if you want to change a GPA to 3.14 instead of 3.144, right? You can easily do that. If you want to change something to all caps, you want something simple, easy to do. But pipes can also be used to do other types of transformations, and we'll play with that. No one's going to expect you to do it, but we'll play with it, right? For example, you can use pipes to display dates and currency values appropriate for a locale, and you have all sorts of transformations. And of course, you can define your own when you get fancy. For data logic that isn't associated with specific view and you want to share across components, you create a service class. In order to create a service class, that service class has to be injectable. It cannot be used in a component if it's not injectable. Again, these are all generated. I'm just telling you what the decorators are so you'll see them. Okay. The decorator provides the metadata that allows other providers to be injected as dependencies in the class. If you want to use it in a component, it needs to be injected in there. Dependency injection lets you keep your component classes lean and efficient. We don't have to do anything inside the component class. It also allows, if they don't fetch data from the server, validate user input, or log directly to the console, they delegate all of that to a service, right? So if you change the way you do logging, the components never have to see it, right? Because all that's done in the service, right? That's the basic idea. We'll create a console.log type thing too, because we will, but it's not that interesting, right? Like it's pretty like boring. But I'm going to say this, and I don't want to mean this in a very mean way. Angular, and if you keep it simple, it's not hard. If you're having real problems, logging services is probably your least of your problems, right? It's not like Java where you're going to have tons of code and then you're looking at the output to see what went wrong, like your SQL statement or something. Remember, all database access for Angular is actually coming through Spring. So all you need to do is ask the endpoints for this, or send this data to an endpoint, right? So it's a lot different. We won't actually need to console.log everything. We can, of course, but probably not necessary. Today we created a hello world application. We'll review initial assets. I'm going to show you that it's going to match at the end. I'm not going to show you I'm not going to keep hopping back and forth because it's all the same. We'll need to see the structure of a typical SPA. Note everything starts with index.html. Finally, we'll work through TypeScript. Everything works via transpiled JavaScript. ngserve transpiles everything into working JavaScript files. That's it. Takes that TypeScript, turns it to JavaScript, and if you want, you can open it up and see what it looks like because it's just JavaScript. It's a text file. Good luck making sense of it. I use obfuscation code to make it fun to read. Yes? Good luck with that, but you could. So SPA structure generally looks like this. Okay, you have an index.html file and a main TS. The main TS, of course, is TypeScript files usually, but your main TS is going to be your main component, your app component. And then you have environments, you have assets, and then you have something called app under source. All of these are under source. In app, you have the app component.css. Here's the thing where it's awesome. Remember all that CSS stuff you did? What if I told you you just copy and paste it in there and then you're done? That's literally it. Wait, what? As you create components, as you create the thing, various things you need to do, it'll automatically be imported. Right? Told you like it. And so you have CSS, you have the HTML. We'll look at these individually. You have the root component and the main module, module.ts, right? This is all bootstrapping things. We don't really care about most of these, okay? This folder, I don't know what is in E2E, by the way. I don't even know if it's there right now anymore, but this is the one where your root modules in PM, remember those root modules, those things that took a long time? That's your big folder. You can remove that and I can copy mine in and you can submit your homework with be less than a megabyte or 2 megabytes, right? Instead of hundreds of megabytes, okay? In fact, so for you, those of you that are not familiar, by the way, you type Explorer dot and it pops up Windows Explorer. So you don't have the E2E anymore, but about 200, nope, going for 300, 339 megabytes. And copy everything except for that. Still 84.7 megabytes. That's not great. What about this? I do need that other stuff. I do need this stuff in between. It's 800. I don't know what these other things are. So include everything but node modules. They used to be smaller. So you can turn in just that. That will be fine. JSON file, those are config files for the CLI. We are going to need to make changes to it periodically. It's almost always some need to change something in the config files. Those are actually these guys. See the JSON files, those are usually config files, and we can change those really easily, right? We won't do it that often, but we will need to do it. So the root HTML looks like this. Ta-da! I mean, it just looks like this. And you have a root component for our Angular application, app-root. And that's it. Everything gets loaded and gets put in app root. Any HTML page I might do goes in there. Ta-da! Entry point, this just bootstraps it. There's nothing in main.ts. Platform, browser dynamic, bootstrap module. Which one do we want to bootstrap? App module. We want to catch all errors and send it to console.error, right? Pretty simple. This is already done for you. This code's already there. And you go, wait, what? Actually, let's open the source code. Open in VSS code. Remember, I didn't actually write any of this code, right? This is written for me by whatchamacallit. Okay, all done. I'm just telling you what it does. We will usually ignore it afterwards. The main module, app.topmodule.us, does some imports. It makes some declarations, marks which modules are usable in this context. And then it has imports. We're going to play with the imports. It's not going to be skippable, but you're going to need to import things. Right now, we just have a browser module. It's basic. I think that's the default. Right, you go to app component. Where is it? There it is. No, app module. Right now, we have the browser module and we have the routing module. Yay, by default. But later on, when we need an HTTP client, when we need this, when we need that, we'll have to make sure they're imported. You're going to see me make those changes as we go along. Also, when we create, as we create components, this file will be edited to include those as well. When we create a service, that's going to need to be imported in providers. We'll talk about all those changes as we go along, but though we don't have to do anything with that now. And then bootstrap is app component, it's your entry point. From now, it goes from the module to the component. That's how it does it. Then we get into root component. We have the import component, blah, blah, blah. Marks it as a component. We have a selector. The selector says it's app root. Where's the template? What style URL is being used? We can specify it. Now, if you hadn't noticed, inside the app, you have app component.css. That's for the final, but you also have HTML. This concept below is only to delete the template to load to get started with the project. I want to do this after I start it running again, because I want to show you what happens when you modify a file. But you can see I can actually, as I'll create components, it creates other things, and I can add things. Like you can have a different CSS page for each component if you chose to do so. Not usually considered a good idea, but if you wanted to change one small thing, you could do so pretty quickly. So you can actually specify what your template URL is and what your style URL is, as well as other things. Selector is not that important for us, but we'll talk about that a little bit. And then you want to specify the title. specify the title. Now, again, I didn't write any code, right? Yes. I didn't write any code. This is written for us completely. If I wanted to change this, I can change it. Now, when we create components, we often won't have these things in here. We'll talk about that as well. But this app root, by the way, where does that come from? Sorry. That ties that to that. Okay, that's what that's it. That's what that's doing. We generally avoid that because we don't need to bother with that, but that is why it's called app root. That's why there's a selector there. But we don't care about that. We want to change the title though. How do we do it? Go in that component, change the title, boom, boom, boom. We're going to do that too when we get there. Default template, we're going to change it to just the title and rerun serve. So let's do that. I want to actually run it first because I really want you to see it. What happens when I screw up and when I don't screw up. Okay, I screw up all the time. I hate when things take a long time. Y'all want an Oreo while I wait? No, you don't like Oreos?
Yeah, I mean, they're cool. I'm like eating gum right now.
Oreos beat gum, no?
No.
Hey, hook her up. No, it's fine. You don't hook her up then. Be selfish. There's the trash right there. That's trash can.
No, it's like that.
It is a recycling bin, but you see the trash can? The trash bag indicates it's a trash. Hey, don't open the unopened one. That was so good. Your face. Sorry. Did you see your face? No, go ahead. I told you to open it. It's totally fine. He's making fun. He's making you stop and go.
I do the same thing in the catering all the time. People get upset too.
I used to work in a grocery store, so I used to say, if you do a about face and look down, you got it. Well, son of a bitch, you don't be a smart ass. I can't help it, you're an idiot. I used to get in trouble. All right, so now that we got it running, so we're gonna make a couple changes. The most important change we're gonna make, I'm gonna go and do a couple things. This is the title of the application, so this isn't gonna change the title of the page, by the way. It's just the title of the application. We're not gonna mess with that one, we'll just leave it. But this HTML with all this junk in there, watch this. Okay. All right, let's do this right the first time. What do you think? See it? It screwed something up, which is fine. Invalid ICU message, missing, which column? Did I do that wrong? Ha, you need two of them. Whatever. But you see, it's error immediately. I didn't recompile it, didn't do anything. I just change it and save it. Ta-da. Now, that's because that title is that, right? But what if I wanted to make it something more interesting? What's it called? Let's go. Right, and I gotta make sure. Remember, it's easier to just put it everywhere than it is to remember where you cannot put it. Yes. I think you're gonna get error things like this in VS Code because it doesn't completely understand it, but you get fewer errors in VS Code than you do in NetBeans. So VS Code's a little better editor. This is the true cast. The true, how do you check and see if it works, right? So you want to be careful. It's not going to tell you that you have errors. All right, now I'm going to go in the app component and I'm going to change this to page title. Data binding. right? We're going to, I'm really going to stop, by the way, I'm not going to keep going. Eventually our app will have the basic components. Very first thing we're going to do is index and detail. We're going to do index, which shows a list of employees, IDs and names, except we're going to do students, obviously. And what is that going to do? We're going to create a list of students, right? First thing we're going to do, we're going to have to create a service. Obviously, we're going to have to create a service because we're going to have to communicate with our Spring endpoint. We're going to have our Spring endpoint running, right? So we're going to have a Spring endpoint running, and we're going to have to create a service, and then we're just going to go get me the list. Yes. We're going to need to create a component. No, we're not going to start off by creating a component. You go, why not? The reason we're not on this is because we have a root component that has nothing in it. Instead of doing that, let's make our main page the list of employees or a list of students, right? That makes sense. Wouldn't you agree? I want another word. You can. That's my preference. I meant to watch you eat them and see how other people eat them.
Why you still pull them apart?
Oh God, I pull them apart every time. I cannot eat them without pulling them apart. But here's the thing, I don't judge you if you want to like, you know what else is really good for me?
Well,
Milk. You ever dip these in milk? Straight fire, man. Anyway, so the first thing we're going to do is the index, right? We don't need to create a component to do it. We're going to do it. So the first thing we're going to do is write if statements and loops, right? The very first thing, we're going to use a template engine. We're going to write loops and we're going to if statements. If their GPA is a certain level, higher or lower than 2, we're going to red or green, right? That type of thing. Yes. Simple. Keep it simple, right? Second thing we're going to do is we're going to have, obviously we'll need to do the list first. We'll need to do the for loop first, and then we're going to do some if statements so we can see what those look like. Then we're going to come in to create a new component. The second we create a new component, now we have to talk about routing. So yes, we've already included the router in there, but how does routing actually occur, right? We have a routing module, but it's got no routes. The very first thing we'll need to do when we do our list and we do our if statements is we'll need to do something with routing. So I think I've organized it where the first day, I don't remember. I always cheat because I just keep going until we're done, by the way. We're going to do the add employee, edit employee for students, right? We're just going to do all of them. Okay, we are, right? But the point I was going to make is that although I organized it in, we do this one day and then do the next day and then do the next thing the next day, we're actually going to just, it's not necessarily going to end evenly, which is why I did not yet record for brain farting, man, I cannot think of the day. Why I did not yet record November 7th. Remember, we're going to have that one recorded because I'll be out. But if you look at the syllabus, I actually talk about what type of things we're going to do, but we can't do anything without routing, right? Like you can't have 2 components unless you have a route, right? So you have to be able to get from one thing to another. So even though it says routing and introduction of forms, developing front ends with Angular, we'll probably start playing with simple routes here, right? And then we'll wrap up routing here, and then we'll start doing our add and edit forms. Good news, bad news. You guys like good news, bad news, right? It always means good news is involved. An add page and an edit page, if you do them in a certain way, you don't have to have 2 of them, right? Wait, what? I could create a very complicated add edit page that did both of them. Yes, but it'd be more complicated. So I'm going to do both, but it's copy and paste. I mean, It's copy paste. It's bad. Like how quickly it takes to do. You'll be amazed that like the last 10 minutes of that day, I'll be doing the edit page. It does not take long. Once we do form and form validation. Then in advanced, excuse me, no, we don't do form validation that day. Then we do advanced Angular form validation. So we got the forms, we do connected the data. Then we're going to make sure it's what's called good news, bad news, strings, easy. There's nothing complex about doing strings, about doing email addresses and all those things. Integers are a pain in the butt. Good news is you're going to watch me do the directive and then you just use my directives. We have to create some custom validation, which is why we spend a whole day on it. But then we have full form validation that'll actually prevent you from clicking on something unless the form is valid. So it's actually, it's easier, in my mind, it's easier than, once you get it set up, it's actually easier than doing the form validation on the server side, but it's actually more repetitive, if that makes sense. Simpler, but repetitive. Good news, CMP, right? But that's the point we're gonna do. So I'm gonna actually start building the application. 1.7, we'll be doing forms. I'm going to point out really quickly though, that the add and edit pages are essentially copy and paste. They're really, once we do the add page will take me a minute to walk you through and explaining how it's connecting this to this. Right. I'm going to have that day, the add student page that we created in the past. And I'm going to have, when I do the index, I'm going to have the index page that we used. What's it called? Why? Because we already had the HTML for it. I just need to move it into a template, right? It won't take long at all. Then we'll get in place with some advanced topics. Once we have a finished product and it's validating, we'll play with some advanced topics like sorting. Delete is not trivial. By the way, if we want to delete something, it's not trivial. We'll talk about that. Delete's probably the more complicated problem than all these other ones. But we'll talk about that as we go along. Why is it not let me, oh, so I didn't click on it. So we discussed client-side web app server development using client-side frameworks like Angular. We described the development environment for Angular, including the setup of Node. We discussed Angular concepts using modules, components, views, data binding services. It seems like a lot of code, but remember, there was virtually no code that I actually wrote in that Hello World example. Whole Hello World example. The only thing I did was take the index.html page and I put one little directive in there, the curly brace title, curly brace title, and that was it. Right? That's the only thing I did. So a lot of this is going to be generated code. Let it generate the code for you. Could you type all this up? Yes. You're sadomasochist. Is that the right word? Sadomasochist, right? Yeah. Go right ahead. You want to spend that much time. I remember at a meeting, I was supposed to create a web service and I used generated code to do so. And they gave me shit about it. I was like, why should I spend all day writing it myself when it's generated in 20 minutes? I said, well, don't you have to fine tune it? I was like, no, generates it. I check it. If it's good, unless it uses arrays or uses a certain thing, I don't have to do anything with it, right? Like this part is generated. There's really, but they were under the belief that you should actually write all the code out. Yeah, just typing it would take me 2 hours. By the way, that's like the level of typing. Well, I'm not doing that. But anyway, I explained to them and then I showed them how to use the tools and the various things. I'm like, wow, yeah. You had your guy create a simple web service and he spent all summer, a high school student doing all summer doing a web service project, which I could have done in like 20 minutes. I don't know if they taught much, but yeah, high school student was the one that pointed out that I used a generator. Whatever. I don't care, but use generated code. If you can use generated code, use generated code. There's really, no reason to what you call it. Now, once we generate code, we have to customize it to our needs, to our what you call it. Sure, but use the generated code. We talked about with the views, the data binding services. We haven't actually done any data binding except for that title. When we changed the page title. Note, I want to point out really quickly, when I changed the page title in that component, I just created a variable without doing anything else. It's JavaScript, remember? I don't have to say var page two. I can just do this. Could I have created var something? Yes. Do I want to? No. I just need to make sure it's inside app component, and that is actually a field of app component, which then the component can just read. So we did do data binding, but we're going to get more complicated than that, obviously. Not much more complicated though, as it turns out. We'll talk about that when we get there. Too many windows. Too many windows. And so services and so forth. Now, unlike other classes where they might use fake objects and those type of things, we're not. We're going to just go right into using a service because we actually have the database stuff already done. It's all done. Even validations, all done. If you did your homework 3 and you use your homework 3 server instead of your homework 2 server, you have server-side validation already done. So now you just need to do client-side validation, right? Boom. So we'll be doing that as we go along. We talked about modules, components, and services. We're going to have our root module, and for your project too, it's going to be the same kind of concept. You have the root module, and then you're going to import other things. 99% of you are never going to need a second. I would say 100% of you, but 99% just to give myself a little edge here. None of you will have to create a second module for any purpose. Okay. But you will use a lot of services and components. We discussed single page application concepts, including directory and application structure. And for more information, the setup local, you might have to actually type that in. If you want to read more about Angular architecture, right here, that's where most of this presentation stuff came from. I use Wikipedia too. But the good news is, all I really want you to do between now and next class is do that setup local thing. You can test everything. So when you do the Node.js from a command line, run npm. If it runs a command, it's installed. Then to the Angular installation. You can test that by typing ng new my app, and it will create an application. This one takes a minute, right? And then you can run it by typing ng serve. You should be able to do that, okay? Now, a couple of things are going to be different. So in the past, every time I made changes to my Spring framework, I actually created new, what's the word? I created new projects every time. I will not. I'm actually going to continually add on to the one I'm doing. I'll show you how to subtract things as well, but we're going to keep adding on to the one we're already doing. Okay, it is not as simple. Removing a component or removing a service or removing that is not as simple as you think it is. Okay, you actually have to remove it. Remember, I told you about if you have a service that goes in providers and so forth, you actually have to remove it from there if you want to. So it's ideal to think about what you need ahead of time to generate only what you need. Right? Ideally, you work through one component at a time, all the way until you're done. Yes? Why? Obviously, if you're working on something and it screws up, you know where it screwed up. It's in that component, right? It's kind of ideal. But yeah, that's the most important thing is you install and get that to run. I'll make sure you have that link, by the way. Does anybody have any questions, problems, or complaints? Project deadlines will not be moved at any point during the semester. They have to be when they are. It's not like you move those, then I have no guarantee that you're going to finish anywhere on time. Yes. Homework, we'll talk about when those deadlines are moving, but honestly, they should be in already. I'm going to give you a little extra time, I guess. The bottom of my heart. but there are gonna be no alternative assignments. You missed the homework, you missed this or that. You're not gonna get credit for those, right? I do not have time to create alternative assignments and all those things. Okay, and the drop date is Thursday. So if you need to drop, you know what your running average is at this point. I'll make sure to get everything graded that you have turned in by Wednesday, so you can make an informed decision. Okay, guys? All right, so have a great day. Hey, bad news.